I have 2 points I want to I kind of add on to what Toby is saying. First, I don't actually agree with your definition of NATO being the what do you call it, organization structured for the profit of war and keeping the United States out of this. So you draw the line above the sovereign state of the US and under NATO, whereas I draw the line above the government of the United States, including NATO, as the kind of the main instigators in all of this, and leave the Americans.
You might be right, but I like Americans. So.
No, yeah, I'm leaving the Americans out of it. It's their government, which is influenced by all the lobbying, and I draw the line underneath them. I think they are a big part of the whole problem here. And the other point I wanted to make was this idea that Poland is going to absorb part of Ukraine. I think that is, to me, the most plausible thing that's going to happen. First, they actually mobilized a whole bunch of people. And I think that's exactly what this is for. And what I think is going to happen is if Russia gets anywhere close to Kyiv, suddenly there'll be a referendum in Lvov and all the other Western cities to say that, hey, save us from the Russians, and we would like to join Poland. And then suddenly Poland gets larger. So Ukraine never actually joins NATO or the EU, but the bits of land west of Kyiv is going to suddenly become Poland. And
that's going to make Germany squeal like...
Yeah, like they won't have a say in this because, like you said, Poland is much closer to the US than Germany is. And for the US, having a larger Poland to counter Germany is great. They are always worried about a very powerful Germany. So
yeah, that's a victory for NATO over the EU.
Yes, but the thing that I think will happen is that they won't take Kyiv. They won't let Kyiv do that because you see, if Poland absorbs what's left of NATO, including Odessa and Mykolaiv and Lvov and all of that, suddenly they would there will be a strong case for them to take over the debts that have been incurred in the war, right? But if they leave Kyiv alone and they take all the ones on the left-hand side, even including Odessa and Mykolaiv, just leave Kyiv and say, oh, the Ukraine state is still there. It's all these other parts of Ukraine that have joined us. Ukraine is still there, and all the debts are in that state, in the rump state of Kyiv, just the little city of Kyiv, and so then Poland is like, oh, see, yeah, all these people asked to come in, we agreed, so none of our business. We are here. We didn't evade them. They offered to join us, just like what the Russians said about the 4 regions. We didn't invade them.
And then NATO will flip on their position on the sovereignty of borders again, as they do.
No, so Poland did it. It was great because Poland
it will be like Kosovo. It's liberation.
Russians,
when we do it, it's liberation. When the Russians do it, it's an invasion.
And they're evil. So
Well, it will also be a good thing for NATO because they still get to expand their member borders closer to Russia, anyways. Which I think is one thing that I find it hard to. I kind of suspect that the Russians would not be very open for that. And one thing to kind of underscore it will be Belarus and Russian troops right there, which has stated publicly: if Poland goes into West Ukraine, we're going to get you for it, right? We're going to move it.
I think Drew is right. What can they do? They'll be fighting a war of occupation. It would be a disaster for them.
No, if they vote to enter into Poland, those are sovereign Poland territory now, and that's part of NATO. There's nothing Russia can do. It cannot attack NATO.
It would also be hugely hypocritical given Russia's stance in the Donbass if they then fought a war of occupation in Lvov.
Well, I mean, the Russians could simply disrupt the invasion, the referendum in the same way that their own referendums weren't actually complete. They didn't have territorial control. They didn't have the majority of population with it, for that reason, and there was also quite a lot of those who would have voted against that left. And it was also under military occupation. And the last one becomes quite pertinent. The referendum regarding where to go what becomes quite quickly quite moot if Russia and Belarus starts occupying territories. Then referendum by who and what and so forth. Not because the issue here then is not necessarily Russia. Russia wouldn't necessarily say, oh no, we're going to have a referendum for you joining us. We're going to allow you to have a more genuine referendum whether or not you want to be a part of Poland, because we consider it as illegitimate. Whether it is or not kind of doesn't matter, right? Because the annexation of the Ukrainian territories, legitimacy. Seriously, like I'm not so sure that it's going to be something the Russians like, oh, they cannot do anything because now they're just going to be a part of NATO. There's a process for having Ukraine come into NATO, and if the process is referendum, then Russia could very quickly pounce on that and then make it all of a sudden we have just Ukraine from the east come into the west. And not necessarily
Donbass is now Russia. So just like Donbass is now Russia, and that's the old process.
But it will not happen because, right, the whole point of the Russian militarizing with Belarus, creating joint group, is to prevent something like this to happen. Because the entire point of the Ukraine war is to prevent NATO from spreading nearer to Russia. So if Poland try to pull anything, then we're going to have the Belarusian invasion into Ukraine, 100%. For sure. So the fact that this is going there is a deterrence, I don't think the Poland scenario is going to happen. And coming back to the EU, Ukraine going back joining EU thing, just as Aki mentioned, the very fact that if Ukraine enter EU, they're going to have more votes, and no EU country actually will allow that to happen, especially the major countries, because why would we want to let this broken and in-debt bankrupt country to have any political say over the EU, over ourselves? The Germans or French would be like, why would we want to listen to them or let them have a decision or let them have veto power over anything? So the very fact that this is there's this concern, this political concern, I doubt that they will want Ukraine into EU, and they will definitely, by the time there was peace, no more war, they will start to pull up all the regulations saying that, to join the EU you need to solve this problem, that problem, your debt, your corruption. Well, they will become all the excuses to drag it out. We
should lay something clear, especially for those who are not already aware. This Ukraine and EU, this has been a long time going, and especially as the war came up, there were more and more announcements of it, and then you would have detractors from within the EU who would say like, no, why would we want to have the Ukraine involved and so forth? And like, as you said, why would they want to have a debt-ridden state when they can have a debt-ridden state that is not a part of the EU, but they can still be exploiting? Just like they did with Greece, which is an EU member, but this time they don't have any there's a different thing, but they can use Ukraine as a client state, a debt slave anyways. So I don't think this thing about Ukraine and EU, I think it's, if anything, it's a coping campaign. That's what I think it is.
It's just a ploy to keep the war going, as far as I'm concerned. That there is no genuine, sincere thing that they are doing to go to help. Like, who the hell will talk about joining an economic group in the middle of a war?
Pro-Western Ukrainians wouldn't necessarily know that or understand that, or maybe would know, even if they do kind of understand, like, oh yeah, there are some issues with it, like, but they strongly believe it because we are Westerners, like we should be a part of it, and look how much support they're given. They can find a lot of things where their confirmation bias makes up a picture, and so I think it's a very bloody, a muddy thing that it may happen, but anything that occurs regarding Ukraine being involved with either Poland, thus NATO, or Ukraine, EU. I don't think the EU will happen for reasons we have already outlined. And I think the thing with NATO, that is, if anything, goes back to what we were talking about, a prolonged war, not the war ending now.
And also, on top of that, is like we say, we know that most of the women are out of Ukraine now. The European countries could just absorb all these women into their country, and they can get a younger population, or all this, which is currently the European countries are all suffering from an aging population. They will happily absorb all these people in, and these
That's
people
exactly right. I've actually read,
because
I've read politicians saying that actually they want those people to stay. So I think Wyatt's absolutely correct. You know, it suits Western European countries to take them.
And on top of that, women's psychology is never, it's always to find a better mate, find a better security. No one will, unless they have some very strong reasons, they're not going to go back to Ukraine.
I don't think a panel of 6 guys should try to guess the psychology of women.
No, this is reality.
I think this chat became from Defense Politics Asia to Defense Politics Andrew Tate.
But this is the reality, because this is sociology, this is psychology. Women, they are already away from Ukraine. Unless they have very strong family reasons, they are not going to go back to Ukraine. They're going to settle down in the new countries, especially the new countries are more comfortable, more secure, safer, and less corrupt, perhaps less corrupt. Maybe the guys are richer. So the number of reasons why to go back to Ukraine is actually very, very low. And if they have any economic sense of or understand the politics, why would I go back to pay up hundreds of billions of dollars of debt for my country? I just not be part of this country. It's not my problem
love
anymore.
For the country, love for Ukraine.
Well, a lot of those women have children as well, so they're going to be thinking about the future of their children. And why would they children back to Ukraine to be debt slaves in somewhere close to Russia? You know, like I think Wyatt's right.
And psychologically, women
I'm not disagreeing. I'm just
However, we should not
discuss this.
But we should not dismiss cultural heritage and sense of communal belonging and those kind of things. And I agree with all of you regarding that the Ukrainian women would first and foremost be wanting to get their own things straight. If they manage to, it's like I alluded to earlier, if they manage to do it quite well, they might want to, and they have this sort of patriotic sense and so forth. They may indeed want to come back somewhat later, and this time they are, they've been consolidated in the West. So they may be most likely, I would assume, getting themselves involved into their former homeland to invest and be a part of the business community therein, be it on the lower or the higher echelons, like entrepreneurs.
But they will stay in the host country first, for their children. For their children, even if they have children, if they are single parents or whatever, they would, for their children, they'll just stay in the host country. There's no reason to go back to Ukraine. So this is a big problem. If no one wants to go back, then your country have very few women. Even if your guys are all around, your guys will say, where is all the women? They will also go out to overseas to find work. And then
most guys are going to have shell shock, let's not forget. Shell shock is a real thing. Even the survivors of this war are going to be dead men walking.
So the economic problem, right, will be compounding. It's not just going to be like, a linear path. It's going to exponentially become worse with every single other problem added in. So the economic future of Ukraine, regardless the war goes in any direction, is going to be horrific, because like any woman that I know that come from a third world country would happily settle in a first world country, happily, easily. Like and even if they have this dream of I'm going to earn the money and bring it back to my third world hometown, home country. After staying overseas for a few years, after they go back, they can't stand it. They can't stand their own country. Then they will like be lost. They will like, oh no, I do not know who I am. I do not know where I want to stay. Because they're so used to the first world country, they're used to the comfort and the security and whatnot. When they go back to their own country, it's like, whoa, my God, my own country is actually so
No. If they come back to that,
my own country for, and this is going to happen to Ukraine as well. The Ukrainian women.
Sure, but that's also we should be careful about generalizing here, because most countries don't look alike all over the place. You have places which are very affluent, and you have places which are business active and so forth. And I think like these women coming back, if they are kind of consolidated and used to the things that are in the West, they will position themselves in Kyiv or wherever, where these kind of more affluent, more European like settings and are already in place, and then they can participate still in the industry, because that, you know, like any other foreign investor coming into a country which is struck by poverty, they have a tremendous advantage because they have a severely depreciated poverty rates. They don't have a lot of the wages. I mean, they don't have a lot of regulations often to deal with, etc., which increases their profit margins. And while sure, we know that the corporations is operating like this all the time, the inherent market dynamics and the way the system is set up will almost force the Ukrainians that come back, whether they want to have some ideal or not, if they want to be business entrepreneurs, they will be positioned in the same economical hierarchy where they are quite sufficiently above the average Ukrainian to be able to, for the lack of a better word, exploit the labor power there, and and they can get donations from the West and so forth, probably getting subsidies in that regard to get their industry started. And, you know, why not? It's a good PR thing for the West anyways. Look how much we're after we tried to, we kept Ukraine sovereign and all that kind of stuff. And now we're doing all this brilliant, rosy things to rebuild it, right? So, and they will showcase these women, like for all the, even if it's just like 2 women coming over, they will like get their daughters to pretend they're also in the, yeah. So I think that's part of the nuance worth considering. You know, maybe not significant, but I do recognize that as being a likely dynamic to occur over the longer run.
How about Russia, Aki?
So I'm in Vietnam actually. In Vietnam here we have some many actually Ukrainians that come here, and they're all here. They're models. Even regular looking Ukrainian women are models here, and when they come here, they get that special treatment, and even the ones that I've met, they do not want to go back to Ukraine. I met a few people from Kharkov. They're like, no way, we're going back. And the thing is that I agree with what Coping Things is saying, but at the same time, again, look at Canada. In the initial first year, they see like Ukraine is very, very different from Canada. The whole even the mindset of people around you is very different. In Canada, people are more individualistic, whereas in Ukraine, there's a sense of community. So there is that emotional thing. But like I stated earlier, the longer that they stay in the Western country, the more that feeling evades, the more you get assimilated in that country, and after that you don't want to go back. So Wyatt's point still stands that they're not going to go back, and most of them are not going to go back. And even I in the comments before, I've read some people saying that, Ukraine can just ask Western countries to deport those people. But yes, Ukraine can do that to men who have fled the war, but it is actually a UN human right for any person to be allowed to immigrate or claim refugee status. So the people that have left, it's completely up to their choice if they want to come back or not. So and if I'm speaking honestly, like Abhinav said, 3 to 5 years is how long this war, in my opinion, is going to last. At least 2 years. And 3 years, 1 year, 2022, 2023, 2024. It is more than enough for these women to get used to the Western country. They're probably going to find a partner there. Maybe their husbands died in the war. I don't know. Maybe they were not married, but they're going to live in the West. That is my opinion, honest opinion.
Well, I should clarify one thing about them coming back. The Ukrainian women coming back, just one point to clarify, they don't actually have to move back and live there. They can move back and have their summer houses there, and still be doing businesses and investment and all that. So
yeah,
exactly. But
like any other
Ukraine. So
I can counter that point as well. Think of it this way. You have $1 million to invest Coping, 1 million for Drew, 1 million Abhinav, and 1 million Wyatt. You have this money to invest, and you're in a different country. Would you go to Ukraine and invest it, which has already been invaded twice in the past 10 years? Or would you go to Dubai and buy a summer house there or somewhere else?
I would definitely.
I was referring to those who had some sort of patriotic sense, not just like whatever doing for their own sake. The women that were going back would be those who had some sort of like sense of nationality and want to get back to their family there and stuff like that. That was the one. Not just opportunists by themselves.
Yeah, hang on, Aki. I don't think you. I think you're assuming my answer would be the opposite. But I would definitely go back to Ukraine to invest, because if you are from that country and you speak the language and you know the lay of the land, and here is a war-torn, destroyed country, which will have opportunities out the wazoo when you are to rebuild. To any kind of foreign currency will be worth double, triple, quadruple their actual value there. Just like what happens in Afghanistan. After the US pulled out and the Taliban took over, guess what? A whole bunch of Chinese businessmen went in and started to do business deals there. A lot of them lost their shirt because they are not familiar with the way to do business and the customs and what. But they're learning, they're building hotels, they're building factories, So any kind of war-torn country, the moment peace is declared, that's the best place to invest if you know how to do business there. So
and to add to that point, if I may, that basically means that those Ukrainians that are coming back who have more capital, they will be able to get much more holding and a lot more control in that country. I mean, we may even see like 20, 30 years down the line, female oligarchs popping up as a result of this war.
Yeah, this is how oligarchs are made. Just like in Russia, you know, in the 90s when it was
tear down a country, have someone.
Yeah, that's how you make money.
Now that you're talking about Russia, let's come to Russia post-war. So in the first case scenario, how if there's a negotiated settlement, how does that affect Russia's economy? And do you guys think, to start off my first question, do you guys think that the sanctions, or the bigger sanctions at least, would be lifted if there's a negotiated peace settlement? Would these sanctions stay in place? Would it be taken out? And even if they're not taken out, how would they fare against Russian economy? So I'll start with Drew.
I think regardless of whether the sanctions are taken out or not, and I don't think they will be unless it's a specific stipulation of the peace agreement that specific sanctions are taken away. I don't think Russia will ever, or Russian business people will ever want to look to put their money in the West anymore. It is the amount of pain. The amount of pain caused is enough to last a couple of generations before the feelings normalize again. Russia is just going to look east. It's going to look to China. It's going to look to India. It's going to look to Southeast Asia even. It's going to look to Africa. It's going to even South America to actually, I think, build up its trade links and its economy. Basically, if the BRICS continues to grow, those will be Russia's main trading partners going forward. This risk of suddenly losing everything that you have built just because your government decided to do something that the West doesn't agree with, is ephemeral to any kind of businessman. Businessmen like they like stability, they like political stability, and with the West, I would say having such schizophrenic leaders, that is huge source of instability for them. So there's no point spending 10 years building a business and then just letting it suddenly get shut down because your home country, the West doesn't like what your home country does on a political level. Yeah, Toby, you popped out. I think Aki would repeat the question.
Yeah, my internet sucks. What can I tell you?
So Toby, the question was that what about Russian economy? Do you think that if there's a negotiated peace settlement in the near future, would Russian economy keep going the way it's going? And do you think the sanctions will be lifted? And would the sanctions affect the growth or destruction of Russian economy in any way? In the long run.
Really, I'm not the guy to ask this question. I don't know enough about the Russian economy. I would say, like, if we listened to Putin's speech, I thought that was very interesting because he made great pains to stress the market nature and the free market in Russia's economy. You know, he was very much saying, we are not going to go back to the USSR. I thought that was interesting for a couple of reasons. One was the Chinese communists loved that. They really did. They thought that was fantastic, which makes me really think Drew knows what he's talking about when he says that the Chinese Communist Party is not communist at all. But also he was speaking a very popular line there. But the thing is, I don't know if it's true, right? Like I'm a bit skeptical of the Russian economy, having dealt with Russians in business. There's a reason that Russia is still poor, and it's not the wicked people in NATO and the rest of it. Like there are fundamental problems in the way that Russia does business. They have got a lot of endemic corruption, whether they want to admit it or not. They have their own military-industrial complex that is profiting from this war, just quietly. I'm not sure that, you know, just as we talk about the West wanting to go in and gobble up those resources in Ukraine, I'm pretty sure the Russian oligarchs want to do the same. How Russia's economy develops is probably going to have more to do with whether or not these nice sentiments that Putin puts out there are a reality. And that's got a lot to do with Russian culture. And my fear for the Russians is that this war is actually, it's promoting a kind of nationalism that is against a pure business culture. You know, it's promoting the kind of lack of freedoms that go against business. It's creating a greater state economy, the war economy. So, yeah, I hesitate to be bullish on Russia's economic prospects. If it all goes well for them, then fine. But yeah, I don't know. People talk about Russia being an authoritarian country, and while I, you know, have reservations about the West calling names like that, there is some truth in that. And so I don't know if Russia will become more or less driven by free market principles. But listen, the same can be said of Europe and the West. I think increasingly in Europe, we're seeing planned economies fail. And I think that my own view is that what drives the free market is personal freedom. It's not brilliant people in government deciding, you know, how to make freedom a reality by planning the economy. So that's why I'm skeptical of Russia's economic prospects. This war seems to me to favor the authoritarian and anti-free market segments of Russian society and set back the kind of liberty and freedoms that would push forward economic growth. And that's not me like putting down the Russians. I just think that's the nature of war, right? War empowers the state, and that empowers enterprises that are dependent on state spending and not on the market itself. And that rarely leads to economic growth. So no, I'm not.
Well,
yeah, that's what
I have a more nuanced view on that. To build on Toby's point about authoritarianism and getting more liberty to the people. Business likes stability and structure. So when you say that the government has more authority over the business people, it really depends on what kind of policies that are, you know, if the government has very strong policies and enforces them, but these are all policies that create a stable business environment, then it's good for business. If the government just totally removes any kind of policies, any kind of regulation, it's actually bad for a business environment, because you get the Wild West. You get companies which put poisonous things in their food and they feed it to the people, or you get pharmaceuticals that don't test their products properly and kill a few million people, or cause diseases and things like that. So this idea that the government authority is inherently bad for business is not the right way to look at it. It's more of the government's authority needs to be in the form of creating the right system and structure that encourages business growth. So, for example, an easy way to set up a company, an easy way to fund the company, an easy way to transfer debt. All these are government created systems that the businesses can then use to build the businesses out. And I think, and I don't, again, I've never done business in Russia or actually had business dealings with Russia. But if they can do that, I think they'll be fine. But on the other hand, I also like to go back to Abhinav's original point about primary, secondary, and tertiary products. Russia, even though they are actually technologically advanced in many areas, you don't ever think about buying a TV from Russia, or a car from Russia, or what do they export to the world that the world wants? It's their primary resources, their food, their fertilizer, their minerals. So it's all
and their
these are
weapons.
Yeah, so that's the one high tech thing that they export, which is weapons, but that's always tied politically. So that's not, if the political climate shifts, suddenly you lost the market, even though you have the superior weapons. So even though they have stuff to sell, it's still low margin stuff. That is.
May I ask a question regarding that? Because you say that regarding the primary and so forth, having a lower output, and the primary here would be oil and gas, which, well, okay, this one is an exception to the primary. It's actually quite profitable. But at the same time, since Russia has such an excess, and they are industrialized, and they are developing their tech and industry and expanding it, what kind of goods can Russia export? Well, I mean, in some ways they could create goods that are cheaper because they are in the position that they are in, and thus do be exporting goods that are maybe not cornering the market, but they can at the very least be competing. Not to mention that they will make themselves quite sanction-proof by having, as much of the industrial facet of the economy covered by themselves, also technologically speaking. So I'm not like, I think in the long run, because Russia seems to already be, I'm cutting in my opinion here regarding the sanctions as well, because, I don't think the sanctions will necessarily be lifted entirely, but they won't be held in their entirety either. Especially between Norway and Russia, I believe they will probably be resuming the prior agreements in a more normative fashion. And the part where the sanctions may or may not apply, where Russia may choose to say, no, we have already expanded our market over to the east, which is 4 times the size of EU. And so we just don't have for you because we need to develop our own industry. And so I regarding the sanctions, I don't think I think it's a little bit of both depending on the country and the circumstances. But what will Russia do? Mm-hmm. Because whether the sanctions are lifted, Russia have made public statements regarding Germany specifically, and this was before Nord Stream, regarding that they had made a historical agreement during the Soviet Union that was 50 years old. And here, and there are historical circumstances which certainly put into play why would Germany send weapons to the Eastern Front again, huh? And so Russia has made it clear they definitely did not like that, and this will be affecting the relationship between Germany and Russia in the future. And depending on how Germany develops, as this develops, let's say it goes 2-3 years more years, well, Germany is probably going to look quite different then than it looks now. And Russia might think, you guys don't even have a consumer market, even like your industry, you may be so deindustrialized, it's not worth us to actually even go through the hoops with what if there's a Ukraine and in Poland or anything else regarding pipelines and so forth, and may simply choose to say, oh, sorry, folks, no, we're cutting productions because we also need to keep the prices higher. And we can do that because we are a part of OPEC, the cartel that decides. And, here can we also, if you want to include Saudi Arabia and so forth, which it kind of will make this transition easier. But it's sort of like, to mention China as a tangential example, and U.S. military planners and other planners kind of outlining that currently they have an advantage over China in the terms of a technological gap, which is closing, and that the China still doesn't have a financial architecture to be resisting the Western sanctions. But Russia has been able to resist and are building the financial architecture that enables it, in particular regarding BRICS. And if with China kind of increasingly doing so with the multiple bilateral currency swaps around the world, just keep on adding and adding and adding and adding. They're getting the Petro yuan getting set. They have gold reserves to kind of secure their asset. They're making themselves sanction proof, basically. And so, if you put them together with the China actually being clearly the biggest consumer market, even if it was just in terms of industry for export to other countries, Russia could, I think Russia might even want to at this point. All things that have happened, they might be thinking, you know what, this is bifurcation until something else with the West, because we cannot deal with them anymore in the way that we have done. They've broken old agreements, new agreements, and they're escalating. They're incredibly hostile. They're not open for negotiations, and they dismiss our security concerns completely. There's no, as far as I can tell, there's been absolutely no avenue from the NATO to actually begin discussion and even considering a security architecture as well. So, I think even though there might be peace and sure some things will be normalizing, I think the economic dimension of it all has already shifted so drastically. It started from the very outset of the war, where Russia and China had agreed on several billion-dollar pipelines, like huge pipelines for transferring gas from Siberia. No, was it maybe gas or oil? I don't remember, but to China. And while these infrastructure development will take a few years, well, as Aki already alluded to, the war may very well last 2, 3, maybe even 20 years. And so by that time, Russia will have been insulating it. It would have actually restructured its geopolitical relations economically to a point where Europe becomes sort of irrelevant, really. Even if the war ends, sanctions are lifted, the repercussions for Europe is likely to be the same, which means Norway would still be benefiting. So the longer the war lasts, Norway benefits.
So Koping made a lot of very good points, which is actually part of it I want to talk about as well, because my position on how I look at the prospect of the Russian economy is total opposite from what Toby said. So when the sanctions early in the war, when it first went into effect, then all the brands pulled out. A lot of the Western companies all pulled out. The reaction of the pro-Russian Telegram channels, especially those that are more have worth their salt, they're actually very happy, because for the first time since the fall of the Soviet Union, they have the opportunity to build their industry. That is unprecedented, because once these Western companies all pulled out, there is no competition for a lot of these market segments, and this allows the homegrown companies to actually grow and start to build their market share and to build their capabilities, and this will allow them to become bigger, like what happened in China. The whole point of why China have such a strong protectionist policies is because they want to build their own industries. They do not want the Western companies to dominate Chinese market. And now Russia is forced into this position, and they are allowed to build their own economy. And this actually, if you reflect why Russia economy is so small, when you talk about GDP levels, because they don't export much things. What is the last thing? Other than oil and gas? What do we actually buy from Russia? Like, there's no products that come from Russia. Almost no wheat, fertilizers. All these are like what you say primary products. But as in for consumers, where the real money is, nothing. We don't really import anything from Russia. Why? Because Russia don't really have a chance. Once the Soviet Union collapsed, they don't even have a chance to build up their own local products and stuff. And the Western imports just came in and just flooded the market. No one can survive, not even fast food. So now, for example, you have all these fake Starbucks, fake McDonald's. And then once they are established and they become more secure, and maybe after Ukraine war ended, these brands might actually go overseas and start opening branch maybe in Singapore, in New York. And it was like, hey, this is the Russian McDonald's. They're gonna try it, man. And this is what happens, when we have the Filipino fast food, coming to Singapore. The Malaysian fast food coming to Singapore. It's like, wow, they're actually pretty good, man. They become true competitions to Western brands. Maybe not the Malaysia one. The Filipino one is very good. So
I don't like it.
I think you're highlighting a very important facet here, how economic coercion can, because we traditionally see economic coercion like when the IMF is involved with Western countries, they will impose austerity measures and things like that restructure the economy and break down tariff barriers and so forth, and reduce subsidies to local industries so that these multinational corporations have free way in to start taking over, and they are subsidized by the most wealthiest nations in the world. And here, and then Wyatt points out, like we're talking about here, how economic coercion indeed can do the very opposite, because with this, isolating Russia and so forth, these external factors that tend to be, through capital, domineering and taking over the economy, like many Russians have pointed out, so they now, because of the coercion, they had no other choice actually, which is,
they were celebrating, finally we can have our own Russian car. We can build our own.
So should we hope that we get isolated, every one of us, so we can kind of develop our local industries?
But you can't. Not every country can be like Russia, because Russia, as we knew, they have very high technology,
and
they have an opportunity. It's like
so the reason that Russians can't make a hamburger anyone wants is because of the evil West.
Yeah, maybe because there's no need.
That was the case. Now they can make Ruski hamburgers.
Yeah, and no one's going to want them, right? Because have you ever seen a Russian make a hamburger? This is the thing. There's a culture behind things like customer service and excellence in food preparation, and I don't know.
Have you heard
more power to the Russians? I don't want to slow the Russians, and I definitely think that what Wyatt is saying is it's true. They have an opportunity here, and if they can develop this business culture, and why not? Because after all, Putin is pushing it. It's not like Putin is against this, and I think that there is a desire to become more business-like in Russia, and God bless them, and I hope they do it, right? But the reason that the Russians can't make stuff we want, it's not because of those wicked Americans, right? It's not. And the reason that China is doing such great business in the world is not because of protectionism. It's because they work really hard and they don't charge very much, and they're very business orientated. So I really think that we have to look internally to the culture, and also to the climate, to the business climate. The other reason that China does well is because they have allowed economic liberties, and when before they did, they weren't doing very well. So I don't know. We'll see.
I have a point to make here. So today I was talking to my wife, and this directly correlates to what we were talking about. She came and she told me that here in Vietnam, like the makeup or the design or even the services, the beauty services are not as nice. And we have been to quite a few countries, and she said, I've been to so many countries and I cannot find a single country that does it as good as Russia. And we eventually came to a point where we were discussing that now imagine in Russia, the beauty treatment is one of the beauty treatment skincare product. This is huge. It's a huge market. Plus the women there are very much into it. So the whole cultural is surrounded by that. Now take out all of the French products, European products, American products out of it. What's going to happen? They're going to, for a while, they're going to maybe go to Kazakhstan, buy it, or do it that way. But eventually what's going to happen, they're going to start looking towards Korean products. They're going to start creating their own products. And I think this could be applied to many other industries. And it's definitely an opportunity. but at the same time, an economy does require foreign investment. You cannot just close off your economy. So that's where I think India, China, and the rest of Asian countries come in. And with the rise of Asia, I think this is just my opinion that Russia has a huge opportunity. I don't know, like what Toby says, maybe the culture wouldn't allow it, but I think that the culture started from communism. So I think you would think that they are also hard workers and they can capitalize on it. But I'll pass on to Drew then.
Yeah, I want to play. I want to pour some cold water on all this enthusiasm because okay. So my take is that Russia will basically ignore the West and look to the East. But when it looks to the East, India, China, Global South, Africa, South America, these are the ones that are going to be the customers. So what do these countries lack that Russia can provide other than the primary resources? If you're talking about industrialization, build all those consumer products, China has already got that market monopolized and decades ahead. What are Russians going to do to beat into that market? They can't. So I think they need to look for very specific industries where they have a competitive advantage, like what Aki just mentioned. Maybe in beauty, Chinese beauty products apparently are not that good, So, they need to find, like, they're not going to be able to beat China in, like, building cars,
No,
or
but
making
as you
bridges.
mentioned, Africa, they don't actually have to, because there are a lot of developments going on in Africa, which creates the market for Russia to be selling products. And Russia itself is providing technology such as the telecommunication satellites and stuff like that. Which, just to put an example on this, they didn't just go into agreement with Angola to get up a telecommunication satellite. They committed that it would be a successful one, and if it failed, they would make sure they would continue with the next one free of charge until it got succeeded. So Anglosat 2 was an example of that. The Russians agreed with the Angolans to fund and support and provide technological and technical assistance to make this come true. And when the first satellite just went into space, the Russians said, "Don't you worry, we'll make sure we get the second one online according to our agreement." And this is these kind of bilateral. Angola is, as far as I've understood it, kind of a special case for Russia. They're very, very close as African countries go. But Russia is increasingly having its presence there, and it may not have to industrialize necessarily so much, because if China's inroads are somehow facilitating for an increased consumer market, which of course then Russia would have to compete with China. But the thing is, I don't think necessarily China is destined to be like impossible to compete with. Russia with its circumstances, because China needs the energy, Russia does not. So it could in many ways reduce the cost. And also, let's not forget AI. Russia would have the incentives to do so due to their low population. And if they manage to implement effective AI-driven industries, then they might also want to be participating in the infrastructure development, similar to how the Chinese have done it, which is not just throwing money at it. There, you have a project, throw money on it, and you get succeeded. No, they go in themselves, often with their own workers, with their own materials, and they make sure the project is actually finished. And then they say, now you owe us money. And the Russians may learn from that model, go in and say, like, we have the resources, we have the technical capacity, we need some workers from your side, we can help you maybe with it, we can have the student exchange programs, etc., etc., etc. And thus, this would be not a matter of altruism. It would be because they might be positioning themselves to be a superpower where Africa, the development of Africa, is a benefit for Russia. And it goes concomitant with the interest of China, which is, they want to do the same to a large extent. They want also to not only get their products off, they have short-term reasons for it, where they want to kind of export excess industrial capacity that has occurred during the time they got this real estate boom and the bubble. And they can kind of mitigate the effects of that by offloading it through projects in Africa, and thus make the Belt and Road Initiative come into play. And so there's a lot of interest, they have their interest and Russia has their interest, and they can come hand in hand with creating a market for their both industrialized bases without having to care at all about Europe or the United, like they take care of Europe and United States, but they are kind of so much well on their way to say like, you know, ultimately we won't need them because Europe is in full decline. Who knows what will happen to the United States? And if we can get Southeast Asia and Africa to be a more well developed and have a more of a consumer market for us to sell, you know, it will at least benefit us in the midterm, right? After which, you know, if Africa and Southeast Asia industrializes to a point where, you know, they become less, Russia and China become less competitive, then dynamics change. But, you know, then there will be.
We have to also look at the geopolitics after the Ukraine war, because at this moment, the whole world's focus is on Ukraine. But after Ukraine war finish, who knows, the whole world's focus will be on Taiwan, and who knows, the next sanction will be on China. And so which is why the competition, the China is of course very hard to compete because everything is so cheap, because the way how they manipulate the currencies and everything, basically it's almost like slave worker kind of thing, where no country can compete. As long as you're an open country, no democratic, it's very hard to compete with China in terms of cost. But when times comes, you know, when peace is achieved, maybe Europe want to be friend with Russia again, who knows, then the Russia would have less incentive to be so close with China. Then there goes the competition again between the two powers. Then who knows, Russia could be able to, you know, find new markets that can sell their own newly created consumer products and everything, new cars. Who knows? Because they do have the technology to do a lot of things. It's just a matter of they have never go and try to do it, because there's never the market opening for them to do it. So, and we also need to look at China, you know, how they went from, like, if you ask, you know, can China, you know, be what they are today 25, 30 years ago, people would be a bit hard to imagine China succeeding. You know, we would be thinking, you know, the market is already saturated with American products, you know, European products and whatever. But no, now after 20, 30 years, China have dominated most of the manufacturing. Who knows, another 20, 30 years, Russia might be the one that is dominating, and China might be suffering because of demographic issues and everything. So I wouldn't write off Russia so easily, because ultimately they do have all the resources they need to, you know, to survive and to beat their time. That's how I look at it.
So let's move to Abhinav.
I just want to make a quick point about Greece, because if we look at the IMF's restructuring of Greece after the pigs crisis around 2010, it has basically concentrated on reviving its tourism and on real estate and resorts. And it's been doing okay in recent years. There's been a lot of problem because there were strict austerity measures. So the Greeks went through a lot of crisis. We can also see what the IMF did to some other economies, including Sri Lanka, over the last few decades. So if you look at what worked for those countries, none of them could pull off what Russia can potentially, or China could after the Cultural Revolution, basically. So it's because you can achieve scale in a vast economy because you have so much resources, you have the human capital, and you can isolate yourself and survive for a decent amount of time. A country like Greece, a country like Sri Lanka can't, because it doesn't have the resources to survive for any length of time. And so you need to be in the global setup. You need to talk to all of these institutions, get the FDI. Russia defaulted on its debt, technically speaking, in 1998. Like, nobody really cared. So all of these things happen with larger economies, and they're just brushed aside because you have power. I think that's really the biggest point here, which a lot of people don't understand when they look at the size of the Russian economy, because they measure it in billions of dollars. But that that dollar amount, is dependent on the price of the commodity in the market today on the London Metal Exchange or wherever it is being traded. Honestly, the moment you cut supply, and because all of these components are based on raw material resources, immediately the price goes up through the roof. you can change the price of any of these commodities to 2x, 3x, as long as you can change the supply. I mean, the oil economies have been able to manipulate it. So anyway, the point being that the resilience of the Russian economy, there's no way to know, because a lot of people are saying that the Russians are fudging their numbers right now. I know from a Yale University report that they're saying very strongly that the Russian economy is in severe decline and they're just fudging their numbers. Only time will tell, really. And honestly, we'll know the Wagner group is expecting the war to go for, 3 years to reach the Dnipro. So we'll know if they're able to reach the Dnipro in 3 years, which means they can pump in 40,000 artillery shells every day. Well, they have the resources then.
I think you just answered my question, but yeah, so thank you for that. I'm gonna ask you guys the same question that I asked about Ukraine, only slightly different. You see how Russia is now more dependent on China and India, or we can say Asia in general, but what do you think after this war? Would Russia be able to retain its economic sovereignty? By now, you can consider that they're very largely dependent on India and China. Do you think they will still be able to retain their economic sovereignty when it comes to if there's a peace settlement? Do you think that would happen? Drew, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I definitely think so, because Russia, if it focuses on the things that it's good at, and it has a competitive advantage in, and we have listed a few now, the fashion industry, oil, gas, food, fertilizer, and high tech in terms of like satellites and things like that, space kind of technologies. Yes, competitive advantages in all these areas, and it focuses on that. It's not going to lose its leading role in any of that anytime soon. So the difficulty will be for it to build new industries, which it doesn't traditionally have an advantage in that. So in terms of economic sovereignty, definitely, because its customers need what it sells right now, and weapons as well. So I don't see that as a problem.
What about you, Toby?
I'm not entirely sure what economic sovereignty means, but if it means like not collapsing and breaking up as a country, then sure. Like Russia has the population and the resources to close itself off. It can feed itself. It can provide heating and food. It has an industrial base. It doesn't actually, it's not dependent. It can't be made prostrate. It's like Abhinav was saying, that's not true for countries like Sri Lanka that are dependent on trade just to survive. So in that sense, it is very, very resilient. So yeah, I think that they're going to retain their sovereignty. Whether or not they thrive, whether or not they grow and become the leader in the world, well, that also depends on what happens elsewhere, because if everywhere else falls apart, then they're going to look really pretty just by surviving. The other thing is, as Abhinav said, commodity prices can change. But we're seeing some real structural issues in Europe and in the West, particularly around energy supply. It could be that the West goes into a spiral which makes Russia rich. So anything could happen, but I do think that they are inherently a resilient nation. Probably their biggest challenge is demographics, right? Is the birth rate. But again, that's something that Putin is taking steps to address. He was very clear, and we know from DPA guys that Russia does take the family seriously, and they're providing a lot of subsidies for families and children. That's something that China is looking at as well. It's going to be a problem for the West as well. The burden of the baby boomers on the rest of society is immense in the West right now. So yeah, no, I think the Russians have got a very resilient economy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to go great. But then again, I don't think that matters. I think what matters is that the people eat, and that you don't have a Sri Lanka type situation.